The old clawfoot tub in my Savannah apartment used to be my sanctuary. Hot water steaming, lavender oil diffusing, the quiet hum of the ancient air conditioning a lullaby against the humid Georgia night. It was where I, Alara Thorne, a woman of 40 years who valued order and quiet above most things, found my peace. My stoicism, often mistaken for aloofness, was merely a deep appreciation for tranquility, a quality I'd cultivated over decades. My principles, sharp and unyielding, were the unseen compass guiding my every decision. Life in my third-floor walk-up, nestled in the historic district, had been predictable, which I cherished. My days were a methodical rhythm of freelance archival work, preserving forgotten histories, a quiet counterpoint to the city's bustling charm. My evenings were for reflection, for books, for the simple joy of an undisturbed home. Then the universe decided to test my resolve, my carefully constructed peace, and ultimately my principles. It began subtly, with the new tenants moving into the efficiency apartment directly beneath mine. An older woman, purportedly in her 60s, had secured the place with a housing voucher. I hadn't thought much of it initially. Savannah, with its rich tapestry of life, had its share of colorful characters. I was content to live and let live, but the quiet didn't last. The sounds started first. Not just footsteps, but a persistent, low thrum of activity that seemed out of place for a single, elderly occupant. Doors slamming with unnecessary force. Shouts, sometimes slurred, drifting up through the floorboards. Then came the parade of strangers. Not just the occasional visitor, but a revolving cast of men, shadowy figures coming and going at all hours, their voices rough, their laughter too loud for the pre-dawn quiet. My stoicism was tested. I found myself listening, not out of nosiness, but out of a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just a noisy neighbor, it felt unstable. This initial disruption was the first crack in the facade of my peaceful existence, planting the seed of curiosity and a nascent frustration. What was truly happening down there? This question hung in the air, a silent promise of future unraveling. Then came the smells. A cloying, acrid odor that would creep into my apartment, seeping through cracks, clinging to my clothes, polluting the air I breathed. It was unmistakably the chemical tang of illicit substances. Crack cocaine, I suspected, based on news reports and a grim understanding of the city's underbelly. And something else, sharper, more metallic, meth perhaps. My stomach would clench. My principled nature bristled. It wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a violation. My home, my sanctuary, was being invaded by the noxious byproducts of someone else's destructive choices. This was no longer just about noise, it was about safety, about the integrity of my living space. I tried to be understanding, initially. Perhaps it was a temporary situation. Perhaps the older woman was struggling, providing shelter for people in need. My empathy, a quiet strength, urged me to give them the benefit of the doubt, but understanding quickly curdled into frustration. I attempted a polite conversation, knocking gently on their door, a carefully rehearsed, non-confrontational opening ready on my tongue. No answer, not even a glance through the peephole. I tried again, a few days later, a subtle tap-tap, a murmured hello, still nothing. It was like speaking to a wall. This impenetrable silence from them, coupled with the loud chaos emanating from within, was maddening. It signaled a deliberate disregard, a refusal to acknowledge the basic tenets of communal living. My stoic patience began to wear thin. My next step, rooted in my principles, was to formalize my complaints. I meticulously documented every incident, dates, times, types of noise, descriptions of odors, the comings and goings of the shadowy figures. My resourceful nature kicked in, compelling me to keep a detailed log, thinking of it as evidence for a future, inevitable confrontation. I wrote letters to the landlord, polite but firm, outlining the disturbances, focusing on the quality of life issues, the potential fire hazards from the drug use, the constant stream of unknown individuals entering the building. I expressed my growing concern, hoping the landlord would intervene. For weeks, it felt like my complaints vanished into a void. The landlord, a pleasant man in person, seemed overwhelmed or perhaps disinclined to rock the boat. He'd nod, offer reassurances, but the chaos downstairs continued, unabated. The daughter, a middle-aged woman I hadn't initially known was living there, became a more constant fixture. Her presence seemed to amplify the existing problems, her voice often rising above the others, her movements heavier, more erratic. This was not the quiet, elderly tenant I'd been told about. This was a whole different beast. The sense of helplessness began to creep in, a subtle poison undermining my stoicism. I was doing everything by the book, yet nothing seemed to change. This prolonged inaction by the landlord, despite my clear evidence, deepened my frustration. This was becoming a personal battle, whether I liked it or not. Then, just when I was contemplating my next move, a different kind of quiet descended upon the apartment below. An eerie, almost suffocating silence. It had been nearly a month since my last, most fervent complaint to the landlord, a complaint where I'd hinted at contacting city code enforcement if things didn't improve. This sudden cessation of noise, the absence of the acrid smells, the disappearance of the revolving door of unsavory characters, was startling. It wasn't a return to peace. It was a cessation of hostilities that felt profoundly unnatural. It felt deceptive, like the calm before a storm. My principled mind couldn't reconcile this sudden shift with the pattern of behavior I'd witnessed. The silence was louder than any noise they had made, a chilling question hanging in the air. What had happened? Why this sudden, unnerving quiet? This mystery became a new, compelling hook, pulling me deeper into their orbit. My instincts, finely honed by years of quiet observation, screamed that this wasn't over. It was merely dormant. For those seeking stories of justice against impossible odds, I urge you to subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The true nightmare I feared had only just begun. The morning the news broke, it was a typical Savannah day, thick with humidity, the air heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine. I was sipping my tea, scrolling through my local news app, trying to catch up on the city's pulse. Then I saw it. A mugshot, stark and familiar, staring back at me from the screen. It was the daughter from downstairs. The headline, stark and brutal, sent a cold shock through me. Woman arrested for hatchet attack on ex-partner. My tea went cold, my mind reeled. A hatchet attack in his sleep. On an ex-partner who had an active protection from abuse, PFA, order against her. The details, sickeningly specific, filled the screen. My initial shock quickly morphed into a profound, chilling understanding. This wasn't just a random act of violence. This wasn't just a neighborly nuisance that had escalated out of control. This was her. And then a name clicked into place. The victim's name. A jolt, a punch to the gut. Michael Beaumont, my Michael. Michael wasn't just an acquaintance. He was a childhood friend, a confidant, a thread woven deeply into the fabric of my life since we were kids playing hide-and-seek in Forsyth Park. I knew his history with this woman. I had witnessed, over decades, the insidious pattern of abuse, the manipulative cycles, the constant legal battles, the PFAs that seemed to do little more than enrage her further. He tried to break free so many times, only to be dragged back into her orbit, always wounded, always recovering, always trying to rebuild. This hatchet attack wasn't just a brutal insult. It was the final, devastating act in a long, drawn-out war. It ignited something fierce and unwavering within me, a long-simmering resolve that had quietly awaited its catalyst. My stoicism cracked, revealing a bedrock of furious determination. My motivation, crystal clear and absolute, was to ensure that true justice, the kind that delivered lasting peace, prevailed for Michael, even if it meant stepping outside conventional means. The police, the courts, the PFAs, they had all failed him. It was time for a different approach. This realization was my personal rock bottom, the point where the principled Alara Thorne decided to become the vigilante ally. The first thing I did was visit Michael. The hospital room was sterile and hushed, a stark contrast to the humid vibrancy of Savannah outside. He was pale, a bandage stark white against his temple, but his eyes, though haunted, still held that spark of resilience I'd always admired. He recounted the horror in hushed tones, the cold fear of waking to a hatchet arcing towards him, the desperate scramble for survival. His voice trembled, and I felt a wave of protective fury wash over me. This man, my friend, had endured so much, and now this. The system had failed him again and again. The PFA was meant to protect him, but she had simply dismissed it. The police had arrested her, yes, but what then? Bail, a plea deal. Another release, another chance for her to torment him, or worse. My principled nature revolted against the injustice. She won't be back, I told him, my voice steady, though my hands were clenched into fists beneath the hospital sheets. Not to you, not to anyone, I promise. My stoicism allowed me to project calm, but inside, a storm was brewing. I needed to understand the mechanics of this. How could she have been living right downstairs from me, seemingly for weeks, without my landlord knowing? Or if he did, why wasn't he acting? My resourcefulness kicked in immediately. I began to mentally map out the steps. First, I delved into public records, something my archival background made second nature. I found out the daughter's name, Clara Mee Higgins. Her rap sheet was extensive: domestic disturbances, assault, drug-related offenses. The Hatchet attack was just the latest in a long, violent history. She was being held without bail for now, but I knew how the system worked. Lawyers, appeals, bond hearings. She wouldn't be gone forever unless something more permanent happened. Then I turned my attention to the apartment below. The older woman, Clara Mee's mother, was still there. Her name was Evelyn Higgins. The silence downstairs, which had once felt like a strange reprieve, now felt like a cover-up. It unnerved me. It was too perfect. I started to notice subtle shifts. The recycling bin, usually overflowing with fast food containers and liquor bottles, was tidier. The windows were sometimes open, an attempt at airing out the lingering stench of desperation. Evelyn herself was occasionally visible, a wisp of a woman with a haunted, furtive look in her eyes, moving with a new, almost unnatural quietness. This quiet, I realized, was born of fear, not peace. She knew her daughter's actions had exposed them, and she was trying to blend back into the shadows. My focus shifted from Clara Mee, who was temporarily contained by the law, to Evelyn. My principled mind saw Evelyn as an enabler, a co-conspirator in the chaos, directly linked to Clara Mee's instability and the ongoing issues that had disrupted my home. The Reddit post had highlighted the housing voucher. I knew enough about HUD housing to know that the rules were strict. One tenant, the person on the voucher, and perhaps a registered, dependent family member. Not a revolving door of drug users and a daughter with an active PFA against her. This was clear fraud. My resourcefulness was now fully engaged. I began to research HUD guidelines for voucher holders. I learned about inspections, about reporting violations, about the consequences of fraud. It was a complex bureaucratic labyrinth, but I was determined to navigate it. I needed irrefutable proof. I couldn't just say, "They smell like crack." I needed to build a case that would ensure Evelyn lost that voucher, that apartment, and that Clara Mee had no home base to return to, no safe harbor from which to launch her next attack on Michael. The problem was, even with Clara Mee in jail, the nuisance wasn't truly gone. The apartment still felt like a ticking time bomb. I saw Evelyn receiving packages that looked too large for one elderly woman. I heard hushed phone conversations, late at night, a woman's voice that was not Evelyn's, occasionally distinguishable as Clara Mee's, though I couldn't be certain. The quiet was proving to be an illusion, a facade. This growing suspicion, this sense of being watched even as I watched them, became an unbearable weight. I felt an intense anger, righteous and cold, building inside me. The audience, I hoped, felt this outrage too. My inquiries with the landlord had stalled. He seemed reluctant to take definitive action, perhaps fearing a drawn-out legal battle, or simply not caring enough. "They're quiet now, Alara," he'd said dismissively on the phone, as if silence negated months of misery and a Hatchet attack. This complacent attitude fueled my fire. It solidified my resolve to act as a vigilante ally. If official channels wouldn't push hard enough, I would. One afternoon, I was doing laundry in the shared basement. The smell hit me first, that sickening, metallic tang, faint but unmistakable. It was coming from a small, blocked-off storage area, barely visible through a gap in the plywood covering. My heart hammered. They were still using drugs, even with Clara Mee supposedly gone, or perhaps it was just the residual stench of despair. This confirmed my fears. The quiet was a ruse, a temporary cessation of obvious activity, not a true end to the underlying depravity. The apartment below was still a festering wound in the building. I realized then that direct confrontation with Evelyn was pointless. She was as much a victim of her daughter's influence as she was an enabler. My aim wasn't to harm Evelyn, but to remove the environment that allowed Clara Mee to thrive in her destructive patterns and to bring justice for Michael. My principled approach meant targeting the enabler, the system that allowed the chaos, rather than stooping to their level. This was about severing the connection, not seeking eye for an eye revenge. But how? My mind raced, sifting through the layers of bureaucracy I had uncovered. I needed something irrefutable, something that HUD couldn't ignore, something that would force the landlord's hand, and something that would prevent Clara Mee from ever returning to that address. My patience had run out. My stoicism had transmuted into a formidable, unwavering resolve. I reached rock bottom in my faith in conventional justice, and from that depth, a cold, precise plan began to form. Subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily. The next chapter would be far less passive. My rise from rock bottom wasn't a sudden explosion, but a cold, calculated climb. The despair I'd felt at the system's failure was replaced by an almost unnerving clarity. My stoicism had always masked a deep well of resilience, and now it channeled into meticulous planning. My resourcefulness, usually employed in deciphering ancient texts, was now laser-focused on dismantling a modern-day menace. And my principles, always centered on justice and protection, now justified a more direct, yet still legal and ethical, path. Michael's terror-stricken eyes, the decades of his suffering, were my constant motivation. The first step was to confirm Clara Mee's status. Despite the initial news reports, the legal system could be frustratingly slow and opaque. I couldn't simply call the jail every day. Instead, I leveraged public court records. My freelance archival work had given me an intimate knowledge of how to dig for information, how to piece together disparate fragments into a coherent narrative. I found her bail hearing dates, her preliminary hearings. She was still in custody, which was a relief, but the possibility of her release, especially on a lesser charge, loomed large. This wasn't enough. The true problem wasn't just Clara Mee, but the insidious support system, the enabler. My focus shifted entirely to Evelyn and the housing voucher fraud. This was my leverage point. HUD wasn't just about housing, it was about public funds, about accountability. My previous research had shown me that harboring unauthorized tenants, especially those engaged in illegal activities, was a direct violation of voucher terms. My task was to provide HUD with evidence so compelling, so irrefutable, that they would have no choice but to intervene. I started a new, even more detailed log. This wasn't just for my landlord anymore, it was for the federal government. I invested in a high-quality sound recorder, small enough to be unobtrusive, but powerful enough to pick up the low-frequency hum of bass, the muffled shouts, the distinct creak of the floorboards beneath my feet when multiple people were moving down there. I even captured the fleeting, acrid scents, describing them in vivid detail in my notes, though I knew a smell couldn't be recorded. I recorded the times of specific loud noises, the instances of the overpowering chemical smells, always cross-referencing with local weather patterns to account for humidity and wind direction. My principled mind insisted on thoroughness. Then came the visual evidence. I purchased a small, motion-activated security camera designed for indoor use, claiming it was for pest control to my landlord if he ever asked. I placed it discreetly in my window, angled slightly downward, capturing a sliver of the building's exterior, including the downstairs entrance. Not to record them directly, but to log the constant stream of visitors to Evelyn's apartment. The camera timestamped every entry and exit. The parade of unsavory men, the occasional glimpse of Clara Mee herself during brief visits while out on temporary release for court appearances or other legal maneuvering that I'd learned about, were all captured. Each video clip was meticulously labeled and stored. This was the resourcefulness born of necessity, of a desire for true justice for Michael. My greatest challenge was proving the drug use definitively without breaking any laws myself. I couldn't just walk in there, but I could be observant. One evening, as I was taking out my trash, I noticed Evelyn had left her recycling bin outside her door, overflowing. My stoic exterior remained impassive, but my heart pounded. Inside, amidst the legitimate recycling, were several small, discarded glass pipes, blackened with residue. There were also empty blister packs of medication, not the common kind, but those often associated with illicit drug use. I carefully took photos, capturing the distinct nature of the items without disturbing them. My principled approach dictated that I only document what was publicly visible or indirectly experienced. I compiled all of this into a comprehensive dossier. My meticulously kept logs, the audio recordings of disturbances, the time-stamped video clips of visitors, the photographs of the drug paraphernalia. I even included a printout of Clara Mee's mugshot and the news article about the Hatchet attack, linking it all together with a narrative of how Evelyn was enabling her daughter, violating HUD terms, and creating a dangerous, illegal environment. I organized it all in a binder, tabs clearly marked, a table of contents, and a polite but unyielding cover letter addressed directly to the HUD regional office. It was a masterpiece of documentation, years of archival training distilled into a weapon for justice. My next step was to find the right person at HUD. I didn't want it to get lost in bureaucratic channels. My resourcefulness led me to scour online directories, find the contact information for the compliance department, and even locate a specific investigator who handled serious fraud cases. I didn't just mail it. I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested, and followed up with a detailed email, attaching a digital copy of the entire dossier. I even sent a blind carbon copy to a local investigative journalist I knew by reputation, hinting at a larger story about housing fraud and public safety. I was turning up the heat, ensuring my case wouldn't be ignored. The waiting game was agonizing. The quiet from downstairs, punctuated by the occasional subtle sign of continued illicit activity, still felt like a constant threat. I saw Evelyn peering at me sometimes, her eyes darting away quickly. She knew I was watching. She knew something was coming. This tension was palpable, building anticipation for the eventual resolution. My patience, a well-worn virtue, was tested daily. I reminded myself of Michael, of his long, arduous recovery of his fear. This fueled my resolve. Then, the first small payoff. I received a confirmation from HUD that my complaint was received and assigned to an investigator. A faceless confirmation, but a victory nonetheless. It meant they were taking it seriously. It meant the wheels of justice, though slow, were beginning to turn finally, but the grand payoff, the true justice, was still distant. Clara Mee was still in jail, but her trial date was months away. Evelyn was still below, her apartment a potential haven for trouble. The fear was that the daughter somehow would return and the cycle would begin anew. I needed a definitive, permanent solution. This process, I knew, would be a test of endurance. One morning, the familiar hum of the air conditioning was suddenly punctuated by a different, more insistent sound, a firm, repeated knock on Evelyn's door. I heard official-sounding voices, clear and authoritative. My heart leaped. This was it. I peered through my peephole, observing a man and a woman in plain clothes, but carrying clipboards with official HUD logos. They had come. My carefully constructed dossier had landed. I couldn't hear the exact conversation, but I saw Evelyn's agitated gestures, her attempts to block the doorway. I heard the firm voice of the female HUD investigator, listing terms, referencing violations. It went on for a long time. Eventually, the investigators left, their faces grim. Evelyn, looking utterly defeated, retreated back into her apartment, the door closing with a soft thud that, for the first time, truly sounded like quiet. A few days later, a notice appeared on Evelyn's door. It was an eviction notice, clearly marked with HUD letterhead, citing multiple lease violations, including unauthorized residence and illegal activities. It gave her 30 days. 30 days until the nightmare beneath me would finally, definitively, come to an end. It was the grand payoff I had meticulously planned for, the result of my principled, resourceful, and stoic determination. The audience, I hoped, felt the wave of triumph and satisfaction I did. The next few weeks were a strange blend of anxiety and relief. Evelyn packed slowly, sporadically. I saw her old, beat-up car laden with boxes, but she didn't leave. She was clinging to the last vestiges of her home, her enabling den. I knew she was desperate, probably reaching out to Clara Mee's acquaintances, trying to find somewhere to go. I felt a pang of something akin to pity, but it was quickly overridden by the unwavering image of Michael's terrified face. This wasn't about Evelyn's comfort. It was about Michael's peace and the peace of the entire building. On the 30th day, a moving truck arrived, not a professional one, but a beat-up U-Haul. A few weary-looking men helped Evelyn load the last of her belongings. She never looked up, never met my eye, even though she must have known, deep down, who was responsible for this. As the truck pulled away, the apartment below mine emptied, silent in a way it had never truly been before. The air felt cleaner, lighter. The acrid smells were gone, replaced by the faint, comforting scent of disinfectant used by the landlord's cleaning crew who moved in shortly after. My home was truly a sanctuary once more. Michael, when I told him, wept. Not tears of sadness, but of profound relief. He finally felt safe, knowing that the source of his torment, the woman who had haunted his life, now had no direct connection to the apartment complex, no easy way back into his orbit. He was able to focus on his healing, on rebuilding his life, free from the constant shadow of fear. The building itself seemed to exhale. The other tenants, who had suffered in silence, began to relax. Children played in the hallway again. The landlord, oddly, thanked me, though I knew he understood I had forced his hand. The true consequence of Evelyn's eviction wasn't just her losing her housing. It was the final, definitive severing of Clara Mee's direct link to the community. When Clara Mee eventually faced trial and was sentenced to a long prison term for the Hatchet attack, I knew that my quiet, vigilante justice had played its part. She was removed, not just by the legal system, but by the systemic dismantling of her support network, thanks to my relentless efforts. The surprising twist came months later. I was at a local coffee shop, and I overheard a conversation. A woman, a former acquaintance of Evelyn's, was lamenting. "Evelyn S. in a shelter now," she said. "Clara Me, from prison, found out her mother lost the apartment because of all the drug activity and the people coming and going. She said it was the last straw. Now she's refusing to talk to Evelyn, said she needed to clean up her act and face consequences. Can you believe it? The Hatchet attacker is lecturing her own mother." A strange, quiet satisfaction settled over me. Clara Me, the architect of so much chaos and pain, was now facing the full weight of her choices, cut off not just by the law, but by her own mother, whose enabling had finally reached its breaking point. My justice for Michael had rippled outward, creating an unexpected, fitting consequence for Evelyn and a final, brutal reckoning for Clara Me. The silence in my apartment, once ominous, was now genuinely peaceful. For similar stories of justice being served, where determination meets despair, I urge you to subscribe to Neighbours From Hell channel for new Neighbours From Hell stories daily.